Welcome to Marketecture, where you can get smart fast with in-depth interviews with leading technology executives. I am Ari Paparo, and I'm joined today by Nada Bradury, the CEO of AdID. Nada, thanks for being here.
Hey, Ari. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
So before we start recording, Nada reminded me that at some point you worked for me, but I was not a very good boss. Is that the summary?
I think that's about right. Way back when, in the time machine, you were not a very good boss because I don't think we ever interacted.
Yeah, I don't think I knew you worked for me. That was the challenge.
Right.
Which has been a recurring theme in some of my shows. All right. I've known about AdID forever. I think I may have been the first person to integrate AdID because we put it into DoubleClick Video first version back in 2008, I think. And no one used it, but it was cool to say it on our press release and stuff.
Of course. You were ahead of your time. Of your time.
So why don't you give us the basics? Like, what is AdID? It's a nonprofit company that's trying to do stuff, and you're the CEO, and sort of what's the basic story?
Yeah. So look, AdID is a universal identifier for ad creatives. We are the registry in the US, although we do have global capabilities. And what we do is very similar to a UPC code. If you think about any product folks may use out in the marketplace or buy, it has a UPC code on it that carries with it information. What is the brand? What is the product? What is the size? Same thing applies to ad creatives. We need to understand what they are as they travel through the ecosystem, and AdID provides that. It is a code that is associated to each ad creative, and it carries with it the information such as brand, product, what format is it in, what is the length of the ad, all of those components that are critical for ad management, ad frequency, just moving throughout the ecosystem. And it's true, we are owned by two nonprofits. Two nonprofits created AdID because over 20 years ago, they realized that, hey, look, we need a system in place that can carry information about ads to help, at the time, linear organizations be able to serve ads appropriately and hopefully at some point measure them on the back end. But just because we started out in linear, it doesn't mean we stay there. So I came over to AdID about 2 years ago to make sure that, hey, folks haven't forgotten about AdID. And as things get more complex and really complicated in a convergent cross-platform world, we need to use AdID more than ever, right? To be able to track and understand what's happening.
Okay. So how big is the organization?
We are very small, so less than 50 folks. However,
50? That's not that small. I thought you were going to say 5.
No, less than 50. But, we're small but mighty. We serve the majority of all advertisers. So over 80% of Fortune 500 organizations use us. This is why I said you were ahead of your time. You partnered but didn't use us. All agencies have AdIDs running through them, or they propagate AdIDs. Most publishers are utilizing us throughout the ecosystem. So we're like that little known nugget that is in the middle of everything that happens in the advertising world.
All right, cool. So I think it would probably be helpful if we do sort of the lifetime of an ID. Like, how does it get created? Who creates it? How do they pay for it? Where does it go? How is it useful? Can you do that for us? Like, how is one created, the birth of an ID?
Absolutely. So the birth of an ID can happen anywhere because we understand that the ecosystem is complex. Ideally, we would love to see an ID created when a creative is made, right? But sometimes it doesn't happen at that point at an agency, and it may get created at an agency that is distributing the ad. It may get created by a third party, such as an XR, that is also working with advertisers and agencies for distribution.
XR, formerly known as Extreme Reach.
That's right. Yes. Or it might get created by a publisher themselves. So somebody like a great partner, such as NBC Universal, may say, hey, you know what, we'll create IDs on our end if something's coming through and we don't see an ID on it, or we can't validate the ID that's coming through. So that's how it gets created. We do have...
So how does it get created? They log in somewhere? Or is there an API, or they call somebody?
Yeah. So we have an API. We also have a UI. Again, we're really flexible. You could do a spreadsheet upload, even if that's what you chose.
Crazy.
To, right. I know. Right.
And they have to enter, like, what's the brand, what's the campaign name, who created it, a bunch of other stuff.
Exactly. Depending on who you are, some fields may be pre-populated, right? So if you're Procter & Gamble and you're going in, you might already pre-populate your Procter & Gamble brand name and all of the other components before you start entering. It is an ad that is 30 seconds long, and it is a video ad. It is not an audio ad, those types of components. Okay. But fairly simple.
And there's a fee, right?
There is a fee, yes.
So what's the fee?
Well, the fee depends. So it's volume-based. Our entire goal, Ari, is to get IDs across everything. So it's not an organization that is looking to fleece somebody because we're trying to get people to create more IDs at these astronomical prices. The more you create, the lower your price point. You could create one, it may be $45. It could go all the way down to a very nominal fee if you're putting it across everything. It's really to ensure that we can get transparency and accountability in the marketplace.
Sure. The IDs aren't exactly paying for themselves.
Right. I wish they were, right? Wouldn't that be
fun? Okay. So they create an ID.
Yeah.
God bless. Then what do they do with it?
Well, then it really falls on the agency or various publishers to make sure that it's propagated throughout the ecosystem. And this is where I am on a campaign to make sure that everybody's aware. Just because you create an ID doesn't necessarily mean it runs through the ecosystem. We need to get it into a watermark. We need to get it into a VAS tag. We need to make sure that as it's running through the ecosystem, it is populated. Whatever column says ID, an ad ID needs to go in there. So it can get unwrapped and people can understand what this is and what am I doing with it. And I could do all of those fun value-added components I talked about. Frequency capping, for example.
So you mentioned VAST, and I think that's an interesting topic because VAST always had an arbitrary ID in the field, but people used it for their ad server ID. And so you guys kind of got crowded out. And my understanding is that ad ID is an explicit field in VAST 4 and beyond. Do you remember the details on that?
It is. That's true. Explicit field and 4 and beyond, and also retrofitted for previous versions
I didn't know that.
Of VAST. Yes, that has been a recent revelation that's occurred with our work with the IAB Tech Lab, where we realized, look, not everybody's moving over to VAST 4, right?
Yeah,
we need to make
challenge.
sure exactly. We need to make sure we accommodate everybody else. And the IAB Tech Lab actually came out, I don't know if you're aware of this, something called ASIF. So it's
I was going to ask you about it. Yeah. Tell me about ASIF. We just did just a plug here. We own the website AdTech Explained, and AdTech Explained just did an amazing 1,000-word explainer on what ASIF is and how it works.
Yes.
But I want to hear from you how it works.
I watched it and you guys are spot on. And how it works is it took all of the fundamentals of what Ad ID has been doing here in the US, right? So we work closely with them. Everybody within the ecosystem agrees, right? So you always get people agreeing, this is so valuable, we need to do it, but then how does it get done? We worked with them to say, hey, this is what an ad registry needs to look like. This is what it needs to carry with it. All of those fields I talked about that we collect for an Ad ID. And this is how it helps on the back end. Let's make sure that globally, as folks utilize ad registries, they all look the same because we have so many advertisers in the marketplace that are global organizations, and they want to be able to collectively look at their investments around ad creatives and look at it in the same way. So they utilize the Ad ID format to say, this is what an ad creative identity framework looks like. You have to register with us in order for us to be able to check off, yes, this is a legit ad creative registry. And from there, it provides guidelines on how to do frequency capping and all the things that we talk about.
Is it like an envelope for an ad ID?
It is. Well, not ASIF itself. ASIF itself is just a framework. I would say VAST is an envelope for it.
VAST is an envelope,
yes, absolutely.
Cool. So we got on that because we're talking about backwards compatibility. So is that in the backwards compatibility, is it some sort of naming convention where you just put the ad ID somewhere in some other field?
Exactly. It'll accommodate it within the ID field. And look, what we're looking to do, we don't want to replace any other IDs. Everybody's got their own internal ID. We are here to help make that connection. So look, if you've got an internal ID that you use, that's great, but it doesn't help the ecosystem. Unless everybody's on the same ID, you can't get that transparency. You can't get cross-platform measurement. You can't ensure frequency capping so that Ari doesn't see the same gecko ad 85 times, whether he's looking at his phone or TV, right?
Okay, so let's talk about the ecosystem. Let's do buy side first. So Extreme Reach obviously supports this. They're the TV stalwart in creative management, right?
Yeah.
In the digital space, can I log into the trade desk today and cut and paste an ad ID? Or can you give me some color as to who on the buy side, are the ad servers supporting it or the DSPs supporting it?
The answer is yes and no. They support it from a perspective in which there is a column in which you could insert an ad ID. Are they out there saying, are they saying you need to have it? No. Do I wish they were? Absolutely. I think we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
But it's for digital being so technologically savvy, I think it's also the wild, wild west. And so a lot of the really nice things that we did in linear a long time ago kind of just got dropped because people need to move so fast. So we're trying to get them back.
Okay, so just to put a point on it, Procter & Gamble is one of Trade Desk's largest customers. They're, I assume, one of your largest customers, since you mentioned them. Right. So can they cut and paste their ad IDs from your spreadsheet into Trade Desk and get reporting that goes back into their data warehouse that has the ad IDs in it and matches the extreme reach IDs?
They could. And let me just clarify, it's not a spreadsheet. I threw that out there just to be a little bit.
I love spreadsheets.
Around.
There's nothing wrong with spreadsheets.
I know, but yes, they could. Ideally, what would happen is as that ad travels over to the Trade Desk, it would already be included within whatever format it's running over. And so there wouldn't have to be any cutting and pasting or copying.
Right. What about the major ad servers? So Innovid, Flash Talking, and the Google Campaign Manager.
They do have the capability for it. So again, there is a column for it. Are they doing it across everything? No. It is really driven by who is driving that purchase. Yeah.
Exactly. And in general, could we characterize the use of ad ID as almost entirely video related? Whether it's digital or linear, it's almost always video. Are people using it for banners?
Some do, believe it or not. We used to call it display ads, but yes, some do use it for that. Some also use it for audio, right?
Okay.
So it's across the board. It's every format. Every format's covered.
All right, let's transition to the sell side. So what is the sell side's interaction with ad ID? It seems really important. I know there's been a lot of announcements from NBCU, but if you could just generally step back and tell us, how does the sell side see ad ID?
There are a few different components. One of them is around the not often talked about and less sexy component of metadata and taxonomy in general. So since we work with the majority of advertisers in the marketplace, we keep really close track of acquisitions and mergers and changes in names and what does that look like and how should somebody like a Procter & Gamble be represented within particular records? Is it an ampersand? Is it an and spelled out? That is one way that it's utilized to make sure that it's aligned across systems so that everything's talking together. But the other way is utilizing an ID internally so that they can understand if they are looking to do some sort of measurement on the back end, or can they take a look at what that looks like across all of their properties, right? So not just linear, but perhaps on Peacock, what did those ads look like? What was the exposure and the frequency of that ad exposure, as well as just making sure that they could do ad management, ad placement, preventing ad collision. They're utilizing it internally, especially for very large events. So if you think about the Olympics, they want to make sure, they want to make sure everything's covered and that they know what's running when and what is the nomenclature behind it and getting the right distribution.
But specifically, so NBCU, tell me if I'm wrong, they require ad ID in all their linear campaigns. Is that right?
I would say that they have a strong preference. They highly and strongly recommend. I don't think that anybody's going to turn ad dollars away, right?
So as a buyer, if I'm looking across all my media companies I'm working with, do I have universal acceptance of ad ID or is it spotty? Do I have to cajole people? What's the sell side position?
Yeah, you have universal acceptance in use, but that doesn't mean that it's in every ad creative that runs across. So we're never turned away. Nobody ever says, I don't want an ad ID and I won't use one, but I don't think it's running across every single creative that's out there.
Right. Okay. And the sell side tools, though, the ad servers, both linear and like things like VOD and all those sort of stuff, are they all up to date that they can accept an ad ID and put it out in reporting?
Yeah. You know what? I would assume most of them are because they have to accept some sort of ID. So oftentimes, I think you mentioned it earlier, Ari, one of our issues is that sometimes it's not very explicit. So it just says ID. And,
and you have to know where to put it. You mentioned earlier watermarking, and I assume that's relevant to the third-party measurement. Is there a integration or some relationship with the Nielsen's of the world?
Well, that's why I came over to Ad ID. I spent a really long time in the measurement world, and when I got the call from the 4As and the ANA, the light bulb that went off for me is, look, everything is moving from content to ad measurement. The only way to make ad measurement more accurate across platforms is if you had an identifier associated to it, right? So the same way that we think about people, we need to think that same way about content or creative ads. So creative ads, that is ad ID. My vision is eventually you will not be able to get accurate measurement unless you are utilizing an ad ID so that you know that you are not double counting and that it's the same ad that's running across. We are right now in POCs with alternative currencies that are looking at this. I've had several conversations with Nielsen. I don't, even though they do utilize ad ID internally, I don't think it's across the board, and I don't think it's one of their highest priorities at the moment. But I think that's a miss.
Maybe you can step back here and give us a little tutorial on the state of ACR watermarking for ads. Are video ads widely being watermarked right now? And if so, are the various ACR technologies picking up on it?
Well, I would say that there is watermarking that's happening. Do we have universal watermarking across the board? No, we do not. I think that there is a lot of discussion, Ari, right now, as you might be aware of, what do we do in this space, and can we enact some sort of universal watermarking? All the conversations that are happening around that do include an ad ID, because folks realize if we're going to do it, we need to do it right so we could track appropriately. Sure. Are we going to get there soon? I'm hopeful. But I think it'll be step by step. There are, that's like opening Pandora's box, Ari, to discuss what's happening with watermarking and ACR, because you've got legal issues, you have streamers that will prevent what gets through and what doesn't. And getting everybody on board, I think, is a little bit of a big issue.
Okay. One of the more interesting things I found looking into ad ID was your agreement with the Screen Actors Guild. Could you explain that to our audience?
Yeah. So we are required by SAG-AFTRA for any talent that is within an ad creative needs to have an ad ID. And this is because people need to get paid, right? So they want
the actors, the directors, they need to get paid. Yeah.
They need to get paid. And the only way that they could track it accurately and know that they're getting paid the right amount of money is utilizing an ID system such as ad ID to make sure they're getting their paychecks. So yeah.
All right. But throughout the rest of this conversation, we've been saying, well, it's not fully accepted. It's like it's sort of janky in some places. Not every advertiser uses it. But if I have to pay my actors, how else would I pay them? Would I use non-SAG actors? Or it seems like you have a requirement to use you, and yet you're not fully deployed in every nook and cranny of the industry.
That's right. I think somebody should look into that. And what's happening, and am I getting the right payment? There might be money left on the table. So
we need to get Ryan Reynolds on your side.
Right. I agree. You know what? I think he'd be interested to know. What's fascinating about it is I think probably the majority of the compliance that we get with the use of ad ID probably is driven by when talent is included within an ad versus not, if I had to make a guess.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, let's go for a lightning round. I'll ask you relatively quick questions. You give me relatively quick answers. What's your number one competitive advantage?
That we are here to provide transparency and accountability. We have no ulterior motives. That's it. An ad ID through the ecosystem.
What's your number one challenge?
Adoption throughout the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. I'll follow up. What are the number one objections to adoption?
I wouldn't necessarily call them objections. I would call them archaic ways in which we transfer data throughout the ecosystem. So it's making sure that we can put it into a VAST tag and into a watermark and all the, compliance.
It's just a field, though. I mean, this is the easiest integration in the world.
I agree. Ari, you know what? Let's get out there and tell everybody. It's just literally just enter the code.
Just enter the code. Stop being a pain in the ass here. Okay. I always ask this question. It's not really that relevant, but I'll ask you a different style, which is, what's the relationship between ad ID and the giants, the Google, Metas, and Amazons?
Well, I think they need to get on board. They're not on board yet.
Well, you think everyone should get on board. So
I do. But let me tell you, I think the giants do need to get on board if we're looking at this as a universal registry and something that benefits all of the ad money that's coming in. We will continue to have, and they do operate as walled gardens, but we will continue to never know the real truth of what's happening around creatives unless we can. There's no downside. That's the thing. There's no downside to utilizing it. So it's, I think eventually they'll get there. They will.
So is there no ad ID field in YouTube?
There's an ID field. There's not an ad ID field.
I see. That seems to be a recurring problem.
Yes.
All right. Last question. If ad ID was an animal, what animal would it be?
Oh, let me think. I think it would be a cheetah. It can run fast if you could let it go. If you could just let it run, right?
Let it run. All right. A cheetah in captivity. You're not the first cheetah answer, but I'll accept it. All right, Nada, thank you so much for being here. It was really interesting hearing about ad ID.
Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture Podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.